Today's case is one of unimaginable neglect and heartbreak. What happened in this case seems to be an issue that's happening more and more frequently, and let me just say, it's devastating. We are going to be discussing the details of Delilah's life, her death, and the ongoing investigation, asking critical questions about her mother's responsibility in all of this, as well as the need for greater awareness and support for individuals with autism and other disabilities. With that being said, let's just jump right into today's case. Delilah Villegas was living with her mother in Balch Springs, Texas. Those who knew her described that Delilah was just like any other little girl. She was always happy. She loved playing outside and being in nature. She loved stuffed animals and was always carrying around her purple blanket. Delilah was born with severe autism and was nonverbal. She wore a diaper and required help with using the restroom, feeding, and personal hygiene. It appeared that she relied on her caregivers for many, if not all, of her daily tasks and was unable to care for herself without help. I'm sure most of you are familiar with autism and what it can look like, but for those of you who don't know, autism is a neurodevelopmental disorder characterized by cognitive, social, and sensory deficits. Autism, as with any disability, is on a huge spectrum, and no two individuals with autism are exactly alike. For those with mild forms of autism, they may appear to be shy or introverted or maybe just a bit odd. They may be picky eaters or have other sensory sensitivities to things like noise, light, or being particular about what they wear. Many people with autism like their rituals and their schedules. They like doing the same things, or they have one very particular interest that they really just want to stay focused on. And sometimes they can become overstimulated if they're thrown off their routine. Oftentimes, you may not even know someone with autism even has it. They might just be a little bit quirky or have some traits that maybe are a little bit different from yours. On the other end of the spectrum, the more severe end, some people with autism have severe sensory issues to the point where they have 2 or 3 foods that they'll eat and rely heavily on supplementation to nourish their bodies. They can have very intense reactions to loud or overstimulating noises or bright lights or situations they're not familiar with. They may have intellectual challenges that makes reading, writing, and communication difficult. Some are completely nonverbal and rely on communication devices and things like that to interact with others. Many will have behavioral issues such as self-harm and aggression towards others. I have worked with a lot of children and teens who have autism, and in my opinion, at least from my experience, it seems that a lot of the behavioral issues they have come from either being constantly overstimulated and not knowing how to cope, or from not being able to communicate effectively and having literally everyone around them ignoring them or misunderstanding them. With therapy and the right care team, though, children and adults with severe autism can live enriching, fulfilled, happy lives. They're able to communicate with those around them, and they're able to cope with how they're feeling instead of lashing out with certain behaviors. And that is what seems to be the case for Delilah. Again, even though she had severe autism, her family said that she was always happy and a joy to be around. Unfortunately, when she was around 14 or 15 years old, Delilah's father passed away. This, of course, is such a tragic and devastating event for anyone to have to go through. From there, Delilah lived with her mother, Crystal Canales, her grandmother, and her great-uncle, who I believe have not been named. Other family members outside the home, aunts, uncles, cousins, all reported that after her father's death, they started seeing less and less of Delilah. Her father's sister, Yahaira, said that the last time she saw Delilah was at his funeral. Other family members said that they did also see her at Delilah's older sister's graduation in 2021, and at the time, she seemed to be happy and healthy. After her graduation, her sister moved to Fort Worth, but she would still occasionally see Delilah and kept the extended family members updated on how she was doing. After that, though, no one outside their immediate household ever really saw Delilah. Obviously, this was concerning to family members outside the home, But they trusted that Crystal had her daughter's best interests in mind and was doing what she could to take care of her. But unfortunately, all this time, they were wrong. No one could have prepared Delilah's extended family for what was really going on in that home. By 2:33 p.m. on February 14th, 2025, so Valentine's Day this year, Balch Springs police received a call from Crystal Canales to report that her daughter, Delilah, was having trouble breathing. Officers arrived shortly after, but when they entered the home, they were met with an overwhelming foul odor that was clearly coming from Delilah's bedroom. As they made their way inside, they noticed that there was a deadbolt on the door, which could be locked from the outside, preventing anyone from leaving the room. They opened the door and saw that there was a mattress on the floor, along with 2 pallets with pillows, blankets, and sheets on top. Other than that, the room was empty. Then they found 19-year-old Delilah Villegas unmoving, lying on the concrete floor, curled up in the fetal position. At that point, first responders tried taking her vitals and trying to find any sign of life, but there were none. So it was at that time that they determined she was already dead. When officers first saw Delilah, they actually thought she was only 13 years old due to how skinny and small she appeared. She was clearly malnourished, and when they started examining her body, they found that she had multiple pressure ulcers, lacerations, and bruises all over her body. She had such severe ulcers that the bones in her right shoulder, her thigh, hip, buttocks, hand, and ankle were protruding through her skin. This was all on the right side of her body. I know we've talked about this in other videos, and some of them have been pretty recent, but for those of you who don't know, pressure ulcers are caused by lying still in one position for a prolonged period of time. This happens in areas where you have bony prominences, such as the backs of your ankles, your hip bones, or the sit bones in your butt, your shoulders, and your elbows. These are areas where the bone is closest to the skin. If there's pressure on those areas for prolonged periods of time, such as if you're in a coma and you're unable to move, or if you're paralyzed, then the skin will start to break down from that constant pressure that's being placed on the skin. It first starts as a scab, and then it will start going through the layers of your skin until it reaches the muscle. If the pressure is still not relieved, then the skin will continue breaking down, the muscle will continue breaking down, the tendons will then break down until it reaches the bone. That is why it is so important to change positions frequently if someone is unable to move their own body. Based on the severity of the pressure ulcers on Delilah's body, it was clear that she had been lying on the floor in that same position for a very long time. Then, to add to the fact that she had those pressure ulcers, which can be caused by lying in a bed, it takes a lot longer for them to form if you're lying on a soft bed. But if you're lying on a hard surface, obviously that pressure is going to increase by those areas where the bones are, closest to the skin, therefore creating the ulcers a lot faster. It was also later determined that Delilah had been dead for at least 6 to 24 hours at the time she was found, based on the state of rigor mortis her body was in. Her body was lying in that same position for so long that, according to first responders, there was an outline of her body on that concrete floor, and her body looked like she was mummified in that position on the floor. They said that at this time, they can't determine an exact amount of time for how long she was in that exact position or how long she had been dead, but we do know that it was 6 hours minimum. This directly contradicts what Crystal said about her being alive and having trouble breathing when she called the authorities. I also do want to note that she has been sent to the medical examiner for an autopsy, but this case is so recent that we still don't have the results of that. But all of the information I just told you is based on what they found when her body was first discovered and a very preliminary report from the medical examiner. After the discovery of Delilah's body, officers spoke with Crystal to hear what she had to say about all of this. In that interview, Crystal swore up and down that Delilah was still alive when she called 911. She said that she had just eaten a handful of goldfish crackers and doesn't know why she was so skinny or why she looked so malnourished. She was definitely eating, so she wasn't starving her. Definitely not. When asked about all the wounds on her body, Crystal said that she was aware of the sores and was treating them with Neosporin. She said that she hadn't taken Delilah to the hospital or to the doctor for further care because anytime she did seek medical care, Delilah could become violent and aggressive. According to records later obtained by officers, Delilah's last hospital visit was in 2021. The last medical call to the home was in May of 2021, at which time a welfare check was also done. Nothing seemed to be wrong in the home during that time, but obviously for the 4 years that followed, nobody checked in on her. Now, like I said, there were 2 others living in the home with Delilah and her mother at that time, her grandmother and her great-uncle. When officers spoke with them, they said that they hadn't had much interaction with Delilah for about a year. They said that they very rarely saw her outside of her room. Then, in the several weeks leading up to her death, they hadn't seen her outside of that room a single time. Again, even though they literally lived in that home with her. They went on to say that Delilah could be aggressive towards other family members at times. They said that there were instances in which she could hit, punch, or kick them, so it got to the point where they were discouraged from interacting with her. Officers would also later reveal that there was an incident on the school bus where Delilah had allegedly attacked other students, but they're still looking into this incident. Those who knew Delilah outside the home, though, reported that they never saw this side of her. Family members said that she had always been so sweet and happy, though they admitted they hadn't seen her very much in the 5 years after her father passed away. Neighbors later said that they also hadn't seen Delilah very much outside the home either. They said that if you hadn't lived near the home for multiple years, you wouldn't even know that Delilah lived there. Then, those who went to school with Delilah, like I said that they also hadn't seen her since 2021. But when she stopped showing up to school, they just assumed that she moved, and nobody looked into it.
My mom and my sister did see her in 2021, and it was at her oldest sister's graduation. She was perfectly fine, healthy, didn't seem like anything was wrong.
From 2021 on, Pardo would get updates from Villegas' older sister who moved to Fort Worth. Pardo can't help but blame herself for not listening to her gut.
I do say that I have a blame in all this and where we at right now. And why? Because I had a gut feeling that something was wrong.
According to the arrest affidavit, her grandmother told police she hadn't seen Villegas for weeks, and her great-uncle hadn't seen her for about a year, even though they lived in the same house. Pardo wishes someone would have reached out to police or to her for help.
If you knew that something was wrong or you haven't seen Delilah in months, everything from the beginning to the very end is wrong.
So even though no one saw Delilah for at least 4 years, and she suddenly stopped going to school, stopped going to the doctor's appointments, and had no interactions with family members, no one thought to do anything about it or get first responders involved, including those who were living inside the home with her. In the few days after Delilah's body was found, officers held a press conference where they described everything they discovered in this case up to this point. They said that a reasonable person would have sought medical care for this child, but nobody did. This led to reckless conduct and neglect, which resulted in serious bodily injury to Delilah, who was unable to properly care for herself.
The mother's name is Crystal Canales, and so when the fire department and the paramedics showed up, they stated that it was going to be a CPR in progress, which means that they start administrating CPR on the victim. Unfortunately, because of the position and the condition that the victim was, they did not start on the CPR and call the Balch Springs Police Department. We responded on Horseshoe and observed the victim in a room, curled up, and she was deceased. We know that she was deceased minimally 4 hours because of the rigor mortis. We've asked the medical examiner's office, and they actually said between 6 to 24 hours. Originally, when the officers arrived, they thought she was probably 13 and didn't realize she was 19 years old. It was, as described, skin to bone. There was large lacerations exposing decaying limbs and even some of the bones from her shoulder and on her arm and her leg. She looked like she was in a mummified, in a mummy state of on the floor. I mean, it's just, I'm sorry. She was just in a curled up position on the floor, and it was just unrecognizable for a 19-year-old to be in that position.
To me, it appears that after the death of her father, Delilah probably had some issues that weren't properly dealt with. Going based off of what family members said, she was a happy, joyful girl before then. Imagine that you go through something as tragic as losing your own parent, but you aren't able to verbally express any of your emotions. I see it time and time again where those around people with disabilities will just ignore that person because they're not able to verbally communicate with them. Even family members will ignore their own child, all because they either assume that the child or person with autism doesn't understand what's going on because they can't verbally communicate, or because they don't care enough to communicate with this person because they don't communicate in a way that they're used to, or because maybe their communication comes out in ways that aren't appropriate because they're being ignored so often. I think that Delilah may have felt ignored, or she was dealing with this trauma and didn't know how to cope with it. Maybe her family members weren't getting her the care she desperately needed to cope with her autism, along with everything else that she was dealing with. That's what therapy is for. There are so many options for someone with autism to get different types of therapies to deal with their behaviors, emotions, and to help with communication. It doesn't seem like Delilah was getting any of that. I don't know if she was before her father passed away and it stopped, or if she just hadn't gotten any therapy her entire life because her family never thought she needed it. I don't know, but either way, it seems that as she got older and those around her stopped giving her the care she needed, and after her father died, I think maybe that's when her behaviors started to get out of control. She was getting the attention she so desperately wanted from her family members in unhealthy ways. Obviously, that wasn't the right way to go about it. But again, imagine being unable to communicate verbally and constantly feeling brushed off and ignored, and having all of these emotions and sensations that are extremely overwhelming and having no idea how to cope with it, and everyone around you is not helping. Not being able to understand why they can't understand you, not being able to find a way to get the help you need, and not knowing why they aren't helping you. I'm not saying that this explains for sure accurately why Delilah may have been exhibiting these behaviors, but it can give you some insight into what someone with this level of autism may be experiencing. Either way, in this case, I think that after these behaviors started coming out, instead of getting her the help and therapy she needed, Crystal just gave up. She stopped bringing her around family members, she stopped trying to bring her to different events, and stopped having her interact with anybody, and she just locked her daughter in a room all by herself. I think she gave her a little bit of food and water that she needed to survive for all those years, but eventually, Crystal cared less and less, so she was given less and less, until she eventually starved to death, slowly, painfully, and unable to do anything about it. She couldn't even communicate her pain. Again, we don't yet have an autopsy for Crystal, so we don't know her official cause of death, but I think it's clear that she was starved and neglected by the very person who was supposed to provide for her, love her, and protect her. I think that after being starved and left alone for so long, Crystal went in to check on her one day, realized that she wasn't moving, wasn't breathing, and then called the authorities to try and make it look like, maybe she just died or maybe she was having some sort of issues that she knew nothing about. But really, she had been dead for hours. And the reason it was so late for her to call 911, in my opinion, I think it's because she just didn't check on her. I think if it was up to 24 hours, that shows how little Crystal went in and checked on her daughter. I think she was probably left in that room alone for days on end. One thing I still don't have answers to is the conditions of that room. I don't know if they were dirty. I don't know if there was urine or feces anywhere. Maybe she did go in there and change her diapers every day. Maybe she left her with a bucket or something that she was supposed to use. She absolutely could have cleaned up before first responders got there to make it look like she was at least maybe trying to care for her. I have no idea, but either way, I think she was neglected to death, and I think she was left in that room for very long periods of time without anybody checking on her. Based on everything I've told you up to this point, Crystal Canales was arrested and charged with 1 count of serious bodily injury to a disabled person, which is a second-degree felony. I'm hoping that after the autopsy is complete and more investigation is done, that she is given a heftier charge because she didn't just cause bodily injury, she caused her own daughter to die. As of right now, there also aren't any charges against her grandmother or great uncle, though again, this case is still very active and still being investigated. Officers have said that if someone just got authorities involved, got any sort of help involved, that Delilah would probably still be alive today. And when they say that, I think they're talking about the family members living within that home, and I absolutely agree with that. At the end of the day, no one deserves to go through the suffering, pain, anguish, and torture that Delilah went through. She was left alone in that room without food, water, or any sort of entertainment to keep herself busy. She just lied there alone on the cold, hard floor, probably wondering why none of the 3 family members she lived with were helping her, probably wanting to do something to help herself, but being unable to communicate or know what to do. I can't even imagine what she went through, and I cannot imagine a mother neglecting her own child to this extent, and then her grandmother and great uncle just sitting by as it happened. But that's where this case sits as of right now. As you can tell, this is a very recent and ongoing case, but I wanted to cover it now because we at least know enough to know what's happening in this case. So I do think there will be more information that comes out in the coming days, weeks, and months. And if there is a lot more that comes out, of course, I will keep you all updated either with a new video or by updating the description. But this is yet another case that involves a disabled person not being able to help themselves and being neglected to death by the person that was supposed to care for them. So I know it's a tragic case. I know these cases are tough to listen to, but I still want to bring these cases to your attention because they are so very important to discuss and keep at the back of our minds, knowing that things like this are happening so we can keep on the lookout for any red flags that we can notice. But you all heard my thoughts about all of this, and now I want to hear from you all. What do you think about this case? Do you think that Crystal should be charged with murder? And what do you think about the other family members living within that home? How do you think all of this happened to Delilah? Do you think it was neglect? Do you think Crystal didn't realize what she was doing, or was this intentional? Let's discuss this and any other thoughts you have in the comments below. If you like this video, please make sure to go ahead and leave this video a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel. I put out new true crime and mystery videos every single week. Don't forget to turn that notification bell on so you don't miss out on any of my future videos. Make sure to follow me on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, Apple Podcasts, and Spotify. All will be linked down below. And if you have any case suggestions, please make sure to fill out the Google form, which is also listed down below. With that, I hope you guys have an amazing week. Stay safe, stay healthy, and I hope to see you next time. Bye.